Michael Todd just had a match with Gennady Golovkin at East versus West 15, and as most of you know by now, he ended up winning 3-2. Now here I have a picture that is just after the very first Ready Go took place, and I think that this is going to tell us a lot of really interesting things about what could happen in a potential Michael Todd versus LEVAN Saginishvili match in the future. And at this point, after seeing Michael do so well against Gennady, that's a match that I would really like to see. Now, I know that Jerry's going to pull LEVAN in a little over a month here, and I don't want to take away from that, but let's just say that in theory, if Jerry does end up losing that match, LEVAN is going to need another opponent, and you could give him a Devin rematch, you could give him an Ermes rematch. I think that those things probably will and should happen in the future at some point, but Michael has never pulled LEVAN. And it didn't really make sense for him to in the past because he ended up losing to Gennady. He lost to Devin. He had a great win streak for a while, and then he kind of started losing over and over again. He dropped down in weight classes. There were a lot of reasons that that wasn't going to happen. But I think that at this point in time, Michael has completely bounced back after his injury. I think he is definitely the strongest version of himself he's ever been by a significant margin. And what I think that Michael Todd can do to LEVAN is something that no one else can do. I think that Michael has a very specific threat, and that is his ability to apply up pressure and pronation at the same time. I think that the combination of Michael's up pressure and pronation is the best in the world by a significant margin. This includes LEVAN Saginishvili, this includes Ermes, and everyone else on that top tier roster in the super heavyweight category. And this is what we saw in this rematch. You'll notice that this looks very similar to the lift that Michael Todd has been doing. Michael Todd has this high knuckle position here versus Gennady. He's rolling out, he cracked his wrist back, and Gennady was forced to a flop press pretty much immediately in this match. This is the exact opposite of the way that their first match looked. If anything, I would say Michael has a much more dominant position than Gennady did in the first match. So I think he's made huge progress in terms of the strength of his elbow flexor and his pronation. And what we saw is that even when Gennady tried to flop press and he went ahead and gave that pronation away, or he gave Michael access to his pronation, he still most of the time was unable to actually pin Michael Todd. So I think what we've seen is Michael lifting 190 pounds on that pronation lift. And on top of that, even if you get through that 190 pounds of pronation, he has this crazy sticking points right above the pin pad. So if we compare that to what somebody like Devin did, Devin has a much more of a vulnerability to a flop press. Gennady actually ended up flop pressing Devin, but then later on, Devin did pretty well against LEVAN. He was able to take hand control in that first round, and then he ended up getting flop pressed by LEVAN. But Michael has significantly more flop press defense, and I think that Michael can do something that Devin can't. Devin can do things that Michael can't. He has a lot more of a rounded game, and he has the ability to challenge for height, potentially more so because of his long arm. But I think that Michael's ability to take the hand and wrist to make the match into a really ugly war, if he can get LEVAN's wrist to crack back, if he can take enough height in order to do that and to gain access to his pronation, if LEVAN's wrist goes back, I don't know that LEVAN can flop press Michael in the same way that he flop pressed Devin. I think that Michael has a really specific set of tools that he can use against LEVAN that nobody else can right now, and that's because of his King's move. And even Michael's flop press, even his kind of B move is looking really solid, and he ended up being able to do very well against Gennady using that flop press as well, or just a standard press rather. But what we see throughout this match is that in the first time when Gennady was able to flop press through Michael's King's move and he was able to outclimb him, in this match we saw the exact opposite where Gennady is the one underneath almost immediately, and then later on, Michael Todd ends up completely climbing out of the strap, even when Gennady is flop pressing him, and then he goes up and over the top, and he ends up finishing this match with a press of his own. And Michael did the exact same thing to Kamil Jablonski. So what I'm seeing is that where someone like Devin, where some other athletes, they may be able to do very well at actually taking hand control to begin with, but then they have a vulnerability to someone who can pull without their wrist. That's how Devin lost to LEVAN. First, LEVAN flop pressed him, and then after that, LEVAN did kind of a Todd roll where his wrist was a little cracked back, but he still just went right through Devin. But I don't think that LEVAN can actually do that to Michael. I think that even LEVAN is probably going to have trouble actually finishing the match if he has his wrist cracked back. I think what LEVAN would need to do to Michael is I think he would need to climb up and over the top of him first, kind of like what Devin did to Michael back at King of the Table in 2021, and pretty much maintain full hand control. The problem is Michael has become so strong at this point. He's lifting 190 pounds on the pronation lift, and that's not even with his arm fully extended. I would think that once Michael's arm is fully extended, his up pressure and pronation combination is probably well over 200 pounds. And if Devin was able to crack LEVAN's wrist back, lifting significantly less weight on that particular lift, even though his setup is different and his arm is longer, I think that LEVAN would have an even more difficult time trying to contain Michael. And once he gets down toward that pin pad, it's just going to get even worse. So let me know what you guys think about this. I know that Michael hasn't exactly earned a shot at LEVAN, but the thing is he just has such a unique style that I think could cause LEVAN some issues. And I would just like to see it. Once Jerry faces LEVAN, Mike will be the only one out of probably the top 3 guys in North America, Jerry, Devin, and Michael, that has not faced LEVAN yet. And I think potentially because of that sticking point, that super strong sticking point, and now that Michael has the ability to challenge height more with this tighter angle, I think that he probably has the very best chance against LEVAN out of any of those guys. And I even remember thinking that way back in the day, even when Devin defeated Michael Todd, it was like, well, he ended up beating Michael, but that doesn't necessarily translate that Devin will have a better shot at LEVAN than Michael did, because Devin just has a much longer arm than LEVAN does. So he was able to do things versus Michael that LEVAN can't do just because of his anatomy. Just physiologically, he's unable to do those things. So I think that Michael potentially has the best chance at this point in his career. Maybe you give him one more person, maybe Hermes. But really, I would just love to see the Michael versus LEVAN match at this point, just to see it, just so that it could have happened and we would know what the outcome is. Because I think that there's a lot of unknowns in that matchup. And I think that even if LEVAN wins, even if he wins 4-0, it might be a super long drawn out war. And I would just like to see it. So let me know what you guys think about this. But whether or not you think that Michael has earned a shot at LEVAN at this point, I just want to see it. I think that regardless of whether or not Michael could win that match, I think that out of everyone in the top 10 right now, I think at the very least, he probably has the best shot of making that match take a really long time, making it a total war, and making LEVAN do something that we haven't seen him do yet. We haven't really seen LEVAN have to go up against a King's mover, because while Devin is a King's mover, LEVAN was still able to just kind of flash pin and go right through that King's move. Devin really never hit that sticking points. And Devin more so has a King's move that was learned, that was acquired, whereas Michael has that super sticky spot. He has a bone lock King's move, which I think is a far different thing, and it's going to give LEVAN a lot more issues. So I think regardless of Michael's chances right now, this version of Michael Todd has the ability to do something very unique to LEVAN, and that's something that I would love to see.